They told him he didn't deserve the medal. They told the world he didn't count. But 70 years later, his granddaughter told a different story and made the world listen. This is not just about a medal. This is about a man erased from history and a young woman who refused to let that happen. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe to Unsung Valor Stories, and comment "Honor Restored" to help his name live on. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, the kind of scent that clung to forgotten heirlooms and silent regrets. Sunlight pushed through a narrow window pane, casting diagonal beams across boxes labeled in fading marker. Dad's Army Things. Ava Monroe crouched low between them, brushing her hand over a stack of old uniforms and brittle newspaper clippings. She wasn't expecting to find anything more than relics and moth-bitten cloth, just another Saturday spent helping her grandmother clean out memories. But then she spotted it, tucked between the pages of a worn, leather-bound war journal, an envelope, yellowed and sealed with an old Army crest. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. The name was typed neatly: Private First Class Elijah Monroe. She opened it, and the air seemed to tighten around her. The letter inside was official, clinical in tone, and devastating in meaning. It read, "It is the conclusion of this review board that while the individual demonstrated extraordinary bravery on the field, awarding the Medal of Honor would not be appropriate at this time." It was dated 1946. Below it, written in her grandfather's elegant but weary cursive, were 10 bitter words. "They said I saved them, but that wasn't enough for them." Ava sat down on the wooden floor, her heart hammering. She had grown up hearing scattered stories about her grandfather, the soft-spoken WWII medic who dragged wounded men out of burning tanks in France, who was shot twice and still managed to carry the last man to safety. But he never talked about awards, never mentioned medals. Now she understood why. She heard her grandmother Lorraine call from downstairs. "You find anything good, baby?" Ava hesitated, staring at the letter in her hands. "Yeah," she called back, voice tight. "I think I did." That night, sleep never came. Ava pored over her laptop until sunrise, researching the 761st Tank Battalion, the all-black unit called the Black Panthers. Her grandfather's name showed up in declassified field reports, always near phrases like "extraordinary bravery" and "refused evacuation." But every medal recommendation ended in a stamp of denial. One name kept appearing: Colonel Everett Langston. He had served on the review board that rejected her grandfather's citation. Now, decades later, Langston was a retired U.S. Senator, smiling in recent portraits, his legacy intact. Ava found an old grainy photo from a post-war ceremony. Langston stood front and center, grinning. Her grandfather sat off to the side, alone, the same uniform pressed tight, his face unreadable. She closed her laptop and looked at the photo of her grandfather on the mantel, young, fierce-eyed, holding a wounded soldier with one arm and a rifle with the other. "I won't let them bury you in silence," she whispered. The next morning, she marched into the local VA office with a folder full of evidence and a fire she hadn't felt in years. The clerk smiled politely. "These kinds of reviews can take years." Ava leaned in. He waited 80. Weeks passed, then a phone call came. A reporter from a military journal. "We heard you're reopening a Medal of Honor case. Elijah Monroe?" "How did you—" Ava began, but the journalist cut in. "The story's spreading. You may have started something big." And it had. Her petition sparked interest from congressional veterans groups, then historians, then lawmakers. Turns out Elijah Monroe wasn't the only name buried by the system. He became a symbol. Then, one afternoon, Ava opened her inbox to find 2 emails. The first was brief. Congressional hearing scheduled. Elijah Monroe Recognition Review. The second was a list of attendees. At the top, Senator Everett Langston, still alive, still decorated, still silent. Ava stared at his name, her jaw clenching. The man who denied her grandfather's medal would be sitting in the front row. But this time, This time, she'd be standing at the podium. The congressional hall was colder than she expected. Too much marble and not enough justice. Ava stood near the side entrance, fingers curled tightly around a folder that had once belonged to her grandfather. Her eyes swept the room as attendees filed in, suits, uniforms, aides whispering into earpieces, veterans with chests full of medals, and camera crews adjusting tripods. But her gaze froze when it found him. Senator Everett Langston. He sat in the first row, posture straight, hands clasped neatly in front of him. The decades hadn't softened him. His hair had thinned, but his jaw still carried the authority of a man used to giving orders. He glanced around the room with the calm detachment of someone who thought they had nothing to prove. Ava's stomach turned. She had imagined this moment countless times. What she'd say, how she'd stare him down, what it would feel like to look into the eyes of the man who had erased a hero. But now that he was real, just a few feet away, she felt the heat rise in her throat. Beside her, a young staffer whispered, "You're up second," right after the opening statement from Chairwoman Douglas. Ava nodded stiffly. Behind her, the doors opened again and veterans entered. A few with canes, some in wheelchairs. One, a black man in his 90s, wore the same patch Elijah once had, the Black Panthers. He nodded at her as he passed. That was enough. The gavel came down, and the hearing began. Chairwoman Douglas welcomed everyone, her voice firm. "Today, we are gathered not just to review a Medal of Honor petition, but to examine a failure of recognition, not of what a man did, but of what a nation failed to acknowledge." Her gaze flicked toward Langston. Ava swore he didn't flinch. "Our second speaker," Douglas continued, "is the granddaughter of Private First Class Elijah Monroe. The floor is yours, Ms. Monroe." Ava stepped forward, every inch of her body buzzing. She reached the microphone, unfolded her grandfather's field report, and let her voice carry. "My grandfather saved 6 men in a single night during the Battle of the Bulge. He ran through machine gun fire to retrieve wounded soldiers, refused morphine for himself, and used his own body as cover while rendering aid. His actions were recorded by 3 witnesses, one of whom later received the Medal of Honor." She looked directly at Langston. He did not. She held up the original denial letter. This document was signed by Colonel Everett Langston in 1946. A hush fell across the room. Langston shifted slightly, but didn't break eye contact. Ava continued. "We were told he didn't meet the requirements, but I ask, what part didn't he meet? Bravery? Sacrifice? Or was it something else?" A murmur rippled behind her. She pulled out a photo of Elijah Monroe, smiling with his unit, jungle mud on their boots, hope still in their eyes. "He never asked for this. He never even told me about the medal. But he wrote something once, something I want to read now." She unfolded the back of the photograph. "History isn't what gets printed. It's what gets forgotten. And who gets to forget it?" She paused. "I'm here so you can't forget anymore." For a moment, no one moved. Then Chairwoman Douglas spoke again. "Senator Langston, you were part of the original review board. Would you like to comment?" Every head turned. Langston leaned toward his microphone. His voice was slow, measured, almost too smooth. "Yes, I recall the case. It was complicated. Standards were different then." Ava's jaw tightened. "Yes," she said, "they were." Langston didn't blink. "We did what we believed was best for morale and cohesion." "You mean best for the reputation of an army that wasn't ready to face its own prejudice?" Ava snapped. A stir ran through the room. Douglas raised a hand. "Ms. Monroe, please." Ava straightened. "No, it's fine," she said, but kept her eyes on Langston. "Let the senator speak. Let the country hear exactly why my grandfather was good enough to bleed, but not good enough to be remembered." Langston didn't respond. He simply folded his hands again. Ava stepped back, trembling, not with fear, but with fury held just beneath the surface. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed her, microphones shoved forward. Do you believe Senator Langston will apologize? What would your grandfather say if he were here today? Ava looked directly into the nearest camera lens and said quietly, he'd say this wasn't about him. He'd say, don't let them bury the others either. And just like that, the fight became bigger than one name, bigger than one letter, bigger than one room. And Ava Monroe was just getting started. The news broke the next morning like a dam finally cracking. A short clip from the hearing, Ava's final words, her voice calm but shaking with conviction, had already gone viral. Major outlets picked it up within hours. Social media threads exploded with hashtags like Monroe deserved more and Forgotten Valor. A photo of Elijah's creased Medal of Honor recommendation, overlaid with Ava's quote, became the face of a growing movement. But inside the Monroe household, the atmosphere was far more subdued. Ava sat at her grandfather's old kitchen table, surrounded by yellowed letters and fading photographs. She hadn't slept. The adrenaline had faded, leaving something heavier, the weight of being heard, but still not answered. Across from her, Evelyn Monroe, Elijah's widow, poured 2 cups of tea, steady despite her age. She didn't say anything at first, just set Ava's cup down gently, the steam curling upward in the early light. You did well, she said finally. Your grandfather would have been proud. Ava nodded, staring into her cup. I don't know if it's enough. It's a start, Evelyn replied. They listened. But did they hear? Evelyn looked away, toward the living room, where Elijah's shadow still seemed to linger in the dusty corners, where his boots still rested by the door, untouched since the funeral. They will, she said. Truth makes noise, even if it's slow. By mid-morning, Ava's inbox overflowed with interview requests. A senator from Ohio wanted to meet. A museum curator asked to exhibit her grandfather's letters. A school teacher from Arkansas wrote, "My students are rewriting their history essays after watching your speech." And then, buried among dozens of messages, was one she hadn't expected. Subject: We should talk. Former aide to Senator Langston. The email was brief. Just a name, Matthew Barron, and a phone number. After a long pause, Ava dialed it. Barron's voice was low and cautious. I was an aide to Langston in the 90s. He's not the only one who saw the file. I did too, and I can tell you, the decision not to honor your grandfather wasn't about evidence. It was about optics. Ava's hand tightened around the phone. Can you prove it? There was silence on the line. I can try, he said, but it won't be easy. A lot of people have a stake in keeping it quiet. Send me what you have, Ava said. Everything. By the time she hung up, her heart was racing again, not from fear this time, but from something sharper. Resolve. That evening, Chairwoman Douglas held a press conference outside the Capitol. Standing before a crowd of veterans, journalists, and curious citizens, she addressed the firestorm directly. We failed Elijah Monroe, she said. We failed not because he lacked heroism, but because our system lacked the will to see it. Today, I am forming an independent task force to review all Medal of Honor cases denied between 1941 and 1975 involving minority service members. She paused, then added, and yes, that includes the Monroe case. The crowd erupted in applause. Ava stood off to the side out of the spotlight, but when Douglas stepped down, she walked straight toward her. This doesn't end with a task force, Ava said softly. It ends with the truth, on record, not just for Elijah Monroe, but for every name left behind. Douglas met her eyes and nodded. Then we finish this, together. As the press swarmed around them, one reporter asked Ava, Do you think Senator Langston will fight the review? Ava looked directly into the camera again. He doesn't have to fight it, she said. He already lost the moment the world saw what he tried to erase. And just like that, the silence that followed the hearing became a roar. Not of anger alone, but of awakening. a nation stirred, not just by injustice, but by a granddaughter who refused to let valor die in the margins of history. Three weeks later, the ceremony was scheduled. It was small, by capital standards, but weighty. Not a Medal of Honor ceremony, not yet, but an official congressional recognition of oversight, apology, and acknowledgement. For Elijah Monroe, it would be the first public declaration that he had been wronged, not as a political gesture, but as a moral reckoning. Ava stood backstage again. Only this time, her palms didn't sweat. Her voice had been heard. Her grandfather's name was now spoken with reverence on networks, on radio shows, even in classrooms she had never stepped inside. And now, here she was, about to walk onto a stage draped in flags and lined with the faces of old men and women in uniform, many of them black, many of them who had carried the same silence Elijah Monroe once had. Across the stage, Evelyn Monroe sat in the front row, her back straight, a small bronze pendant resting on her chest, the insignia of Elijah's old unit. As Ava waited for her cue, the program director whispered beside her, "Someone else arrived unannounced. First row, end of the aisle." She didn't need to ask. She stepped forward and peeked past the curtain. There, seated just 3 chairs down from Evelyn, was Senator Langston. He wore a dark navy suit, no press, no entourage, no cameras flashing around him, just his cane resting against the side of the seat and his gaze fixed forward. He didn't clap when others clapped, didn't shift nervously. He just stared straight ahead, jaw set. For a moment, Ava's breath caught. She remembered the smugness in his voice the day he told her, no. The thinly veiled superiority. The cold dismissal of what her grandfather had given. And now, here he was, quiet, almost small, beneath the very banner bearing Elijah Monroe's name. As the speaker finished the opening remarks, Ava stepped onto the stage, not looking at Langston, but knowing he was watching. She approached the podium and unfolded her paper. This time, she had written something, not because she needed it, but because she wanted every word to be precise. "My grandfather once stood alone behind enemy lines to defend this country," she began. "But what hurt more than the bullets was being forgotten when he came home." The room held its breath. Today, we remember him. But we also remember every file that was buried, every act of courage that was labeled insufficient, every soldier who was told, directly or quietly, "You don't belong on that wall." A murmur of agreement rippled through the veterans seated together. She looked down at her notes, then back up at the crowd. "Some people think restoring honor is about giving medals. But for my grandfather, honor was never about medals. It was about memory. He once said to me, 'What's the use of a ceremony if no one says our names?' So today, I'm going to say their names." She reached down, pulled out a handwritten list, not just of Elijah's squad mates, but of dozens of black service members from his unit whose commendations were delayed, denied, or buried entirely. With each name, the silence deepened. Langston didn't flinch. When she was finished, Ava closed the list and spoke directly, her voice clear. "My grandfather never needed your permission to be a hero, but I think this country needed someone to remind it what heroism actually looks like." She stepped down to a long-standing ovation. Evelyn wept softly. Even several uniformed officers rose to their feet. And Langston? He stood too. Not quickly, not proudly, but slowly, as though rising beneath the weight of something long denied. He didn't speak. He didn't ask to. But when Ava passed his row, he gave her a small nod, not of apology, but of recognition. A signal, perhaps, that even the most stubborn walls begin to shift when truth becomes too loud to ignore. The skies above Washington that afternoon held a strange stillness, as if the city itself understood that something overdue was finally being set right. Inside the modest Hall of Honors at the National Military Archive, a single table had been draped in deep blue velvet. Resting on it was a case. Inside the case, a newly struck Distinguished Service Medal, the one Elijah Monroe was recommended for in 1945 but never received. Ava stood beside it with her hands folded in front of her, her gaze alternating between the medal and the two chairs reserved at the front of the room. One for her, and one for Evelyn Monroe. Evelyn took her seat quietly, clutching a folded American flag that had once sat in a shoebox beneath Elijah's bed. Her eyes were tired, not from age, but from the long ache of waiting for a country to see what she had always known. That Elijah hadn't needed a medal to be a hero. He'd already proven that every time he refused to be bitter. General Carrington, a silver-haired man with 6 rows of ribbons, stepped to the podium. He cleared his throat, then paused. "It is not often we get the chance to correct history," he said. "Even less often that we get to do so with the help of those who never gave up demanding it." He turned slightly toward Ava. "Ms. Brooks, your determination helped make this moment happen, but it's not just about a granddaughter's fight. It's about a nation remembering its promises." Ava rose, her voice quiet but resolute. "I used to think history was just dates and speeches," she said. "But history is personal. It's made of names almost erased, folders buried, courage forgotten because of the color of a man's skin. My grandfather never asked for this medal. He just wanted the truth to be seen." She stepped forward, hands trembling slightly as she opened the box and lifted the medal. It gleamed under the soft lights, sharp, solid, undeniable. She didn't pin it to anyone's chest. Instead, she placed it beside a framed photo of Elijah, younger, in uniform, standing between 2 other black soldiers, arms over their shoulders, smiling with a resilience no war could break. "I don't pin this for him," Ava said. "He already wore it in how he lived. I pin it for us, to remember what we owe and what we still haven't paid." A quiet settled over the room. Not awkward, not heavy, just reverent. Then, from the back, a man in uniform stepped forward. He looked no older than 30, with a crisp salute and a soft voice. "My name is Lieutenant David Brooks," he said. "Grandson of Captain Alan Brooks. He's alive today because Sergeant Monroe carried him out from a collapsed trench in Alsace." He turned toward Ava. "My family remembers, and we always will." Dozens more came forward that day. Veterans, children of veterans, historians, strangers. They shared stories, small ones and big ones, each one a thread reconnecting a legacy that had nearly been severed. That evening, Ava and Evelyn returned home. The medal was placed not in a display cabinet, but on Elijah's old writing desk, beside his war letters and the creased photo Ava had once found buried in a box. And on the anniversary of Elijah's passing, Riverton unveiled a statue at the town square. It wasn't large. No bronze horse, no grand podium, just Elijah Monroe, standing at ease, helmet tucked under one arm, the faces of his unit carved into the base behind him. Beneath it, a simple inscription. He carried more than a rifle. He carried their names. People gathered. Veterans saluted. School children traced the etchings with their fingers, and Ava stood beside Evelyn, holding her hand. Because the world had finally seen what had always been there. Not just the man, but the memory no one could erase.